back of the chair was blocking the video feed for the FBI, which is in the next room, making the videotape. So they were getting no video feed whatsoever because it was being blocked. And I had to think quick on my feet and think of a quick reason to move that executive, one of the co-conspirators, aside to unblock that lamp. And I went up to him and I quickly told him, I said, look, the hotel's going to be bringing drinks here in a minute, and we need that table you're sitting in front of to put the drinks on, which is really where the lamp was. And that quickly moved him 2 feet aside, and that way the FBI got a wide view of the video feed, which they needed to use for the jury, for the prosecution. Because everybody was prosecuted in this case, and I mean everybody. Another meeting in Irvine, California. The tape recorder in my briefcase started to click. During the co-conspirator meeting, it started to click. So I had to open the briefcase, and it wasn't quite as funny as what was going on in the movie. It was pretty serious. And actually, the FBI agents aren't even upset with me. They support what I had to do. But I had to fiddle with that recorder. I had to open the briefcase, fiddle with that recorder during the meeting to stop that clicking sound from happening. As the other co-conspirators were talking, splitting up the market and splitting up the pie and deciding who got which customers. And again, they were so much about greed. They didn't see the green lamp. They didn't see me open the briefcase. They didn't see me fiddle with the recorder. That's what happens when your focus becomes greed. During a price-fixing meeting in Japan, the recorder that I had in my jacket was a micro-cassette recorder. And the problem was the micro-cassettes only had 45 minutes duration on each side of the tape. 45 minutes duration. The meeting lasted for 3 hours. And it was a very important meeting. The FBI needed to capture the whole 3 hours, not just 45 minutes of it. So I constantly looked at my watch, and every 45 minutes ran for a restroom break. The only one in the entire 3 hours that went to a restroom break, and I had to go 4 times. And I constantly ran to the restroom, flipped over the tape into the cassette recorder onto the new side, and got back to the meeting to capture the cartel, to capture the co-conspirators talking about splitting up the market. But I had to do that numerous times during that 3-hour meeting because it's just a 45-minute tape. During a price-fixing meeting in Hawaii, the FBI informed me right before the meeting started, just before it started, they said, Mark, we know this is not going to be easy, but the prosecutors just informed them that they want one of the co-conspirators, but they don't want me to say it. They want one of the co-conspirators in the meeting to say the 2 words, we agree. And they want to capture that on tape, audio tape, and videotape. So I had to go through all these charades during this co-conspirator meeting with all of us co-conspirators there splitting up the market, forming this international cartel. I had to go through all these charades until finally one of the co-conspirators mumbled out the 2 words, we agree. And that was captured on videotape and audio tape, showing that all the co-conspirators agreed to fixing the prices and stealing $1 billion a year from our own customers. During a price-fixing meeting in Atlanta, right here, where we're at now, it was the Sheraton Hotel at that time, and it would have been in 1994, and it was the Sheraton near the airport. But during that meeting, someone knocked on the conference room door, and one of the co-conspirators immediately blurted out the words. He says, oh my gosh, it's the FBI. We're all busted. We're all going to jail. He was joking. And all the co-conspirators sitting around that table, and I had to fit in too, so we all started laughing. But in reality, that was caught on audio tape and videotape, and was definitely used with the jury in the prosecution to let the jury know that 6 guys in a smoke-filled room stealing $1 billion a year were laughing about it. So those are the type of things that happen when you're undercover, and I think it gave you a flavor of what life can be like living a double life. So after working 3 years undercover, after wearing that wire every day for 3 years, I was beat. My wife, shortly before that, after I was about 2.5 years undercover, I was blowing leaves off our driveway at 3 in the morning during a rainstorm with a gas leaf blower. That's about how far I was going. I mean, I was really, it took a toll because I wasn't trained for that kind of work. I never had dreams of I studied to be a PhD biochemist. I never had dreams to go undercover, and it definitely took a toll on me. And I knew at some point the company would find out and life would be hell for me. So after 3 years, the FBI informed me that they had enough evidence to prosecute ADM and the co-conspirators. They had enough evidence to take to trial with a jury, and that they didn't need any more help. They didn't need me to wear a wire anymore. They were finished with me. But they also said this was the stage when they go from the covert stage, which was undercover, to the overt stage, which is more public, when they start giving out subpoenas and interviewing the co-conspirators and witnesses and so on. But ADM went on the attack. ADM immediately learned that I was the mole, the FBI mole, the informant, and they went on the attack. And that very night, when ADM learned, I got a call from an accountant who was a friend of mine. He was an ADM accountant. And he called me at my home and said, ADM's going to go after me for embezzlement. Here's a picture of Matt Damon in the movie, The Informant, where he's actually meeting with the two agents that he just worked undercover with for 3 years, and to tell them about his own personal embezzlement. And that meeting actually happened with me in a Chinese restaurant in Taylorville, Illinois, which is near Decatur. And it was a very, very difficult meeting, because I had to tell them that the white knight they thought they had was not so white. So it was a very difficult meeting. But even with those mistakes I made, and I'm going to get into embezzlement a little bit further in a minute, but even with those mistakes of embezzling during the same time that I worked undercover for the FBI still supported me 100%. They even helped me find a very good lawyer, they and the prosecutors, to find a very good lawyer in Chicago who's now a judge in Chicago. And that lawyer, they helped me find in 1995 when my undercover work was done, flew to Washington, D.C. on my behalf to meet with the Deputy Attorney General of the Criminal Division, and he made a very strong case. He informed the Deputy Attorney General that Mark Whitacre is the highest level executive that ever went undercover in U.S. history. And if you prosecute him, it's going to be very difficult to get another white-collar defendant to come forward to assist the FBI. And the Deputy Attorney General was listening. My lawyer also presented, he said, Mark Whitacre helped solve a $1 billion a year case. Helped solve a $1 billion case, in contrast to a $9 million fraud. So he said, a $9 million fraud's huge, but it's minuscule compared to what Mark Whitacre helped do for the FBI. He was still listening. But then his strongest arguments followed that. He emphasized that he said that Mark was never trained to be an FBI agent, and he went undercover for 3 years when your own FBI agents don't go undercover longer than a year, because they often crack under pressure when they go undercover longer than a year. And I went undercover for 3, and I was untrained. So now the Deputy Attorney General was really listening. And then he emphasized 2 other things that really helped get a really good plea deal for me. The 2 things were the following. He emphasized that the bulk of the money that was stolen the last few months that I was undercover, when my mental stability was its weakest and my mental anguish was at its highest, because I was almost 3 years undercover by that point. And he also emphasized that the bulk of the money that was stolen during those last few months that I was undercover was at a time when I was trying to build financial security for my family, knowing that my position was going to be terminated when ADM learned that I was the FBI mole. And it really captured the Deputy General's and his staff's attention. And they were really agreeing to do a very good plea deal. And my lawyer came back and presented the deal to my wife and I in Chicago. We lived in Decatur at the time. It was about a 3-hour drive. We went down to meet him. His name's Jim Epstein. And he presented to us that he said they're going to agree to a 3-year plea deal, 3 years of federal prison. He said with the guidelines, you do about 85% of that, so you do about 2.5 years of that. But he said, but they also agreed to a sentencing hearing about mitigating circumstances, where they were going to allow the FBI agents to come in, the 4 agents that I worked with, let the 4 FBI agents come in to the sentencing hearing and inform the judge of the same arguments that my lawyer just made to the Deputy Attorney General about how their own agents don't go undercover longer than a year and the pressures I was under and on and on and on. And my lawyer felt at the end, he said, I see a chance, no guarantee. The cap will be the 3 years, but he said, I see a chance that we could even get you as low as 6 months prison sentence because of those mitigating circumstances. I fired that lawyer the next day. I was not even willing to accept probation I was just at that point in my life, I was not even willing to accept to be a felon. And I just couldn't accept it, and I couldn't come to terms with it. And I fired that lawyer. And a few months later, I received a 9-year prison sentence instead. When I could have went in March 1998 and got out 6 months later. I went to prison on March 4th, 1998, and got out in December 2006. 8 years and 8 months later, almost 9 years, because of that mistake. And it was the biggest mistake in my life was to get involved with criminal activity whatsoever. And that would have been the second biggest mistake in my life, not to accept that plea deal. So I went from where we had 7 corporate jets, could fly anywhere in the world, to handcuffs in one day. And I can tell you, it was a big change. If someone would have told me when I was at Cornell getting my PhD in biochemistry that someday you're going to be in jail for 9 years, I would have thought that was the craziest thing I would have ever heard. I would have never believed it. But again, I think it's another example of that white-collar criminals, people at corporate level that do unethical behavior are made, not born. Because I wasn't born that way. I wasn't raised that way. But I did get greedy. I did lose my way. And I paid a big price for it. And I got what I deserved. I don't blame the system. A lot of people get out of prison and blame the system and so on. I don't do that. I blame myself. I had choices, and I made the wrong choices. And no one's exempt. No one's exempt from going to jail on white-collar crime. There's billionaires that go to jail. Remember Leona Helmsley, the hotel queen in New York City? Billionaire, went to prison. Martha Stewart went to prison for white-collar crime. Michael Milken went to prison for white-collar crime. So no one is exempt from going to prison on white-collar crime. And I think it's important to realize that, because when I first started getting charged, I thought, I'll just hire enough lawyers and buy my way out of it. And in ADM, they had a lot more money than me, and they went to prison. They couldn't buy themselves out of it. The vice chairman went to prison at ADM. And he and his father were billionaires. And they couldn't buy their way out of it. So no one's exempt from going to prison on white-collar crime. And also, I really want to make it clear that no industry is exempt from fraud, and no industry is exempt from unethical behavior occurring. Fraud and other types of illegal activities and also other types of unethical behavior is happening at churches. You open the paper and you see scandal after scandal at churches. It's happening in our government. It's happening at corporations. I mean, look at Wall Street and our whole economy. The Bernie Madoff scandal, for example. I mean, it's just on and on and on. And there's smaller ones that don't make front page of the news. But every day there's scandals happening. No matter if it's government, nonprofit organizations, churches, corporations. It's happening everywhere. It's happening in your industry. There's no doubt about it. In your industry, there's some gray area that can be done. And I'm not saying it's illegal and fraud's occurring, but there's unethical behavior that happens in every industry. No industry is exempt from it. So it's not just ADM and the food additive industry. The end result of those mistakes that I made, and the end result of not accepting that plea agreement, was almost 9 years in prison for me. And I can tell you, 9 years in prison is a long time. A good way to think about it is go back to your hotel. Just imagine you going back to your hotel room after this meeting. It's 2010. And it won't be near as nice a room as what you're staying in right now. And imagine walking out of that room in 2019, 9 years later, because that's exactly what I did. And it's a long time. 9 years is a long time. Another way to put it in perspective, our youngest son, he was age 6 when I went undercover. He was 12 in 7th grade when I went to prison. He was 21 years old and a junior in college when I walked out those prison gates. So it was a big part of the life of my wife and I, but it was our children's, their whole lives, that case. So when I make mistakes like that, and when people do unethical or illegal behavior, it affects the family, not just the person making those decisions. And I got so caught up with the greed, I didn't think about that. And it cost my whole family. And when you go to prison, there's no cell phones, there's no internet, you're cut off from society. 9 years of prison is like 50 years of real life. It's in slow motion. Here's a picture of a federal prison. And it's in so slow motion, you lose complete control. They tell you when to wake up, when to go to bed, and when to eat and what you eat. Our lights came on at 5:30. We had to be at breakfast at 6:30. Everybody, no matter who they are, had to be at breakfast at 6:30. And you don't get to choose what you eat. You eat what they have that day and for that meal. Lunch was at 10:30 and dinner was at 4 p.m. And dinner, often there would be so many people for dinner because for breakfast and lunch, a lot of guys went off to work where they worked on a Navy base and so on, the base that I was located. But at dinner, everybody's back. And we'd wait sometimes 2 hours in line for dinner. And you had to be there in line by 4 o'clock. And then at 9:30, the lights went out. You go to bed. So you lose complete control. Just a couple months prior to that, I was flying around on corporate jets and having lunch in Manhattan and dinner in Scottsdale the same day. Next thing you know, I'm told when to wake up, when to go to bed, when to sleep, what to eat. So you do lose complete control. But even with those extreme adversities, my wife and I were determined to overcome any adversity. And this was by far the biggest we had come at us. But we were committed to overcome this adversity. And we made a commitment to get better, not bitter. And we made a commitment. The only difference between those two words is the letter I, not the letters FBI or the letters ADM. There was a letter I, and we focused on ourselves, and we focused a lot on me, who had the most of the problems, obviously. And we did get better. And we spent good quality time. It's amazing. And it's sad to say, but I spent better quality time with my wife and 3 children in prison than I was when I was caught up in the corporate world and I had to go meet with the FBI at night and turn over tapes and get home at midnight and everybody was already in bed, only to get up at 5 o'clock to be at work 7 o'clock the next morning to start the next day. And then meet with the FBI in the evenings and on and on and on for 3 years. So we had better quality time with our family in prison. And I tell you something that's remarkable. The prison hours, the visiting hours they allow in federal prison are Friday night for 3 hours, 5 p.m. to 8 p.m., and 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday. So it's 20 hours a weekend. My wife came every single Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for those 8.5 years. When we added her days and my children's days that they sit in a prison visiting room, it adds up to 3.5 years with the holidays and every Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I even got moved to 2 different states for prison. The following weekend, my wife was living there. When I got moved from South Carolina to Florida, she moved. When I got moved from Mississippi to South Carolina, she moved. She was going to be next to that prison, no matter where I lived. And she was going to be sitting there every Friday, Saturday, Sunday during that time. And we spent 8 Christmases in prison. And 8 Christmases is a long time. And I can tell you, each day, each Christmas, my wife would come in there and our children would be sad and say, oh, boy, it'd be great to be home. And my wife would say, you know what? Look at the people fighting in the military. They're not even home for Christmas. So no matter if we're in a living room or a prison visiting room, we're together. And she really did she held the family together. She was a super glue to this family. And we did get better and we survived it. There's several books. Thank you. There's several books been written about this case. The Informant was written by Kurt Eichenwald, New York Times, former New York Times reporter. Very John Grisham style, very good book. That's about 10 years old, that book. It was published in 2000. The book below it is Rats in the Grain. It was written by a lawyer, by James Lieber, lawyer out of Pittsburgh. And it's more like a documentary. It's also 10 years old, was published in the 2000. But it's more the documentary, and The Informant's more in a John Grisham style. The most recent book that just came out here a couple months ago is called Mark Whitacre Against All Odds. And that was written by Stephen Hoover, and that's more the authorized biography and more the family story. Probably less details on the case, but more how the family survived it and how we withstood all the adversities. Then the movie came out mid-September last year with Matt Damon and starring, playing me since we're identical twins. And Steven Soderbergh directed the movie. I made a dark comedy out of it. They had to make it entertaining for an audience. And then there was a Discovery Channel documentary that was also aired last August titled Undercover with the FBI agents and myself and my wife on that. And that can be seen on my website called markwhitacre.com. You can see the Discovery Channel documentary. Here's a picture of my wife and I last September 15th in New York City at the movie premiere. It was a lot different than jail, I can tell you that. Here's another picture with us with Matt Damon. You can see the resemblance. I told Matt Damon, I said, Matt, you're 38, 39 years old. I'm 52. Wait till you're 52. You know, it's not an apples to orange comparison here. No, but we did have a good time at the premiere and to be involved with the movie and so on. But I really want to make it clear that as exciting as a movie premiere may seem, and as exciting to have several books may seem like it is, it was not worth it. I would do anything in life to have a do-over. Anything. It was not worth the 9 years in prison. It wasn't worth 3 years undercover working for the FBI, wearing a wire every day. I had 2 suicide attempts during that time. It was not worth it. I would do anything to do it over. So as exciting as a movie may seem, I'd much rather not been a part of it. I'd much rather live my life better where I didn't make those mistakes. Because my legacy will always be, no matter what things I do, and I've been out of prison for 3 years now, since I was age 49. I went in at age 41, got out at 49 years old. So I've been out for 3 years. But still, no matter what I do in life, I will always be remembered as the highest level executive that went undercover for the FBI, the highest level executive that blew the whistle in U.S. history, who also stole $9 million the same time I worked for the FBI. You never shake that legacy. Sure, there's good things written in those books, but there's also bad things. There's things about greed and stealing and theft, and I got caught up in all that, and it was wrong. And you can never leave that legacy. It's something to always be with me. But one thing I was very fortunate to have, very, very fortunate. The divorce rate in prison is 99%. Divorce rate in society is 50%. In prison, it's 99%. There were 700 inmates where I was located. One of them was a judge, 14 lawyers. One of them was a former prosecutor out of Wisconsin. And I can tell you, out of those 700 inmates, there's a half dozen wives coming. The others are all divorced. Families split up when you go through this type of experience. They don't stay together. So I'm very fortunate to hold my family together. Not only did we survive, we thrived. And I give all my credit for that to my wife. No doubt about it. Another thing, when you get out of prison, most times the FBI agents and the prosecutors that put you there, they normally hate you. The FBI agents, there's 4 of them, are my best friends. I went on vacation with one the June before last. My wife and I did. I talked to him often. One of the agents flew with me to Washington, D.C. a few months ago and met government lawyers where all 4 of the agents and one of my former prosecutors are even trying to get a full presidential pardon for me. A full presidential pardon. That's not the norm when you get out of prison. The support that I've had from these guys, even when this movie came out, they did numerous interviews. One of the supervisors did almost a dozen interviews, including CNN, talking about some of the good things that I did for the case and about the mental stresses that I was under. And so they really took a toll. They really went out and really 100% support. Another thing I was very lucky. Normally when you get out of prison as a felon, convicted felon, 9 years of prison. I don't care if you have an Ivy League PhD or not. I don't care if you have 9 degrees or not. Normally when you get out of prison, you don't have much of a second chance of your career. I was hired the day after I got out. On December 21st of 06, I got out. December 22nd, I was hired as an executive right back into my industry, the biotechnology industry. And a year ago, I was promoted to COO and president. That's not the norm. That's not the norm when you get out of prison. Here's a 2-minute news clip I want to show you that illustrates that.
15 years ago, Mark Whitacre was acting as a whistleblower for the FBI, wearing a wire to expose criminal activity at his Fortune 500 company. Whitacre's actions are now the subject of The Informant, a major motion picture starring Matt Damon. Our Greg Newman found out that Whitacre now lives right here in Pensacola. And tonight, only on 3, he talks with him about what it was like to go undercover for real.
Mark Whitacre helped to break open the biggest price-fixing case in U.S. history. But despite that fact, his FBI handlers say he's never received the recognition he deserves.
And I told you, and you wouldn't listen. You said just the office line, Mark.
Mark Whitacre says for nearly the entire time he was helping the FBI spy on his fellow executives at food conglomerate Archer Daniels Midland, he was losing control due to an undiagnosed case of bipolar disorder.
That involves poor judgment, especially poor judgment on financial matters.
taking $9 million when you're working undercover, I think is pretty good proof of that.
That's how much Whitacre embezzled from the company during that time. As a penalty, he served almost 9 years in federal prison.
The thing is, he never got any credit for what he did for the U.S. government and the FBI for 3 years. That was overshadowed by his other conviction.
Dean Paisley is a retired FBI agent who supervised the Archer Daniels price-fixing case. He calls Whitacre a national hero.
I don't think people realize really truly what Mark did for the government and the people on that.
Paisley claims if Whitacre hadn't stepped forward when he did, ADM may still be fixing prices to this day, driving up costs on everything from chicken to Coca-Cola.
If you look at what he did, stealing from ADM $9 million, that was minuscule compared to the $1 billion plus that ADM stole from you and I.
Paisley and at least 2 other agents who worked on the case are now working to get Whitacre a presidential pardon.
To me, their support is worth more than a pardon itself.
Whitacre's last 4 years in prison were spent here at Softley Field. He was released in 2006, and he and his wife Ginger chose to stay in Pensacola.
We really like Pensacola. My wife's a teacher here. She got Teacher of the Year in 2007 at her school. It does have an inspirational ending, and that's why I tell my friends it's a messy story, but with a very good ending.
Mark Whitacre says he's back on his feet professionally as well. He is the Chief Operations Officer and President for a biotechnology company based in California, and he says he's glad his days as an informant are over. Greg Newman, Channel 3 News.
Well, that gives you an idea of the second chance I had, and that's not the norm. Most people that I know, several friends of mine that were lawyers that I was in prison with, they were barred for life. I have a friend that was a pharmacist that was in prison. He's barred for life out of pharmacy. So most people, when they get out of prison, especially on white-collar cases, they're barred for life from their industry. So I feel very, very lucky to have the second chance that I've received. Now, what can we learn from this? I just want to spend the last couple of minutes, some take-home messages, what we can learn from this historical case, and some preventive measures that we all can take in our lives, no matter what positions we have. Because this is really not just about how good leaders lose their way, it's how people can lose their way. First off, I had 9 years in prison to think about it, and I wish I would have, this slide right here where it talks about keep your life balanced, I should have kept my life balanced. I was all about hyper-ambitious and moving up the corporate ladder and becoming the next president of a Fortune 50 company, and I lost my balance, and I paid a big price for it. When my wife was president of the PTA, involved with the church, and involved with the community, she had a great balance. She did the right things. I lost my balance, and that was part of my downfall. Your value system. I didn't keep my value system in check. My wife kept hers in check. And that's why my decision-making got very clouded as compared to my wife, which was decision-making was always very easy because she kept her moral compass intact. Also, we focused as a company too much on shareholders' value. We should have focused on purpose. We should have had passion for our work. We should have been happy that those customers were our customers and happy that they were buying our products and work with them to even develop more products and better products. But we were too busy stealing $1 billion a year from them. We were focused too much on shareholders' value and not enough about purpose, and we didn't have enough passion for our work and our products. Ethical fitness. I can tell you firsthand because I lived it. It's like physical fitness. You have to work with it. You can get in the wrong culture, and then all of a sudden your views become different and you start rationalizing. That's what I did. So ethical fitness it's not a passive exercise. You have to continue to work with it, just like physical exercise. Always do the right thing. I wish I would have lived by that motto. Deviating from that cost me a decade in prison from age 41 to 49. And that's a strong message. Always do the right thing. Do not become one of these scandals. Not all these people went to prison. John Edwards didn't go to prison, but it's still a big scandal. He was a presidential candidate 2 years ago. Now look, it's a scandal that he'll be remembered for his whole life. Tiger Woods, one of the greatest golfers, probably the greatest golfer in the world. Those scandals are not worth it. On your right is Jeffrey Skilling, who's doing a 25-year prison sentence. He was CEO of Enron. Below that is Bernie Ebbers. He was CEO of WorldCom, doing a 25-year prison sentence. Those guys, they were born good people. Jeffrey Skilling was number 1 in his class at Wharton for his MBA. But somewhere along the line, like me, they lost the moral compass and greed took priority, and they had the wrong focus. always think long term. The short-term gain of that extra $1 billion a year was not worth the long-term consequences that it cost a decade in prison. It's not worth it. One should always think long-term and don't do things for short-term gain. And if I can leave you with one thing, the most important thing if I can leave you with is this. Live your life always assuming that green lamp is with you. Because I did the right things when the green lamp was with me because I knew it was there. But it's what I did when the green lamp wasn't with me that cost a lot. Cost my family tremendously. And I would do anything to have a do-over for that. Because one should always live their life assuming that green lamp's always there. And if I would have done that, it would have been a totally different outcome. And so that's one thing I wanted to leave you with. And I appreciate your time, and I appreciate the chance to share my story and what we can learn from that historic case. Thank you very much.